In this video, what we're going to do is see how we can model a basic gaming handheld. Now, really, this is an exercise using the new boole tool, but we'll also see just how to approach modeling something like this in general. So let's go ahead and get started. So the handheld we're going to be loosely basing our model off of, as we are going to make some changes, or just not really about all of the details in it here, is this particular Ambernick model. You can go to their website, find this image if you want to follow along. But back in Cinema 4D, I've already turned off my work plane in this particular scene file. What I'm going to do is create a plane. This will be for our reference image here. So I'll name it reference. And I'm going to remove all of my segments since I don't need those. We're also going to create a material, but not a redshift material, just a standard Cinema 4D material since we want our viewport to be as clear as possible. I can go ahead and apply this. We're also going to turn off reflectance, and in the color tab or section here, load in our image. And you'll notice how pixelated it is, how low resolution. We can fix that in the viewport tab of this material, setting the texture preview size to no scaling. We'll also add, actually before we add a protection tag, just move this object down on the y-axis a little bit. And now we can add that protection tag so we don't accidentally move it. So we're all set here, and we're going to primarily be using the boole tool, but we might use some other tools and things as well. I'm going to start by creating a rectangle, changing its plane or orientation so that it's flat. And this is going to be kind of our main base or body shape here. So let's just turn on our regular shading. I'm going to get this close to the correct size, and then at some point just make it editable by hitting C on my keyboard or the Make Editable button. This will allow me to manipulate the points. That can be a little bit faster, assuming you can grab the handles and parts of your gizmo. So we'll select those, move these down, do it with this side as well, just pulling it out to the edge. That one actually looks pretty good. Now we're going to chamfer these. So I'll select those three since they look like they have a similar amount of chamfer or rounding, something like that. For the bottom one here, going to select it because it has a lot more chamfer. Like I said, we're going to take some liberties with this. So I'm not worried about kind of bending in or adding that little dent there. We're not going to focus on the buttons or a lot of the things on the side, primarily just kind of the front here. Okay. So we have this looking pretty good. I'm going to drop it into an extrude. So I have my shape selected. I'm holding down Alt or Option, and I'm going to choose my extrude object, and it places the extrude inside. So I'll call this base. And if I want to be able to see through this, what I can do is select the base, go into the basic section here and check on X-ray. So that's looking pretty good. Now, if we were to go to my perspective, I hit F1 on my keyboard. And I pull this up, you can see just how much larger it is. So we can kind of start to make an adjustment here. One thing that is also helpful if you have these, side views is to make an instance of this. So if I have my object selected, choose instance, I can now place this on the side. I don't actually know which way it should be facing there, but I can position this something like right here, and somehow I got pretty lucky with the overall thickness. This too, we can place in X-ray mode by going to the basic tab and checking it on. And yeah, that's looking pretty good from a thickness point of view. This we can move back down if we want, just to make our lives a little easier. And let's focus on the D button, D-pad here. Okay, now this is a place where it might actually be easier to work with a cube, but we're going to go with a rectangle just so we can. And part of the reason going with splines is a little bit better, perhaps, is it allows us more flexibility and control with the boole, since we have more options with rounding and chamfering and things like that. So that's looking pretty good. I'll make it editable by hitting C. I'm just really worried about kind of the outline. And with modeling this, the biggest thing I'm trying to keep in mind is how this was actually built, how it's put together. So anything you can do when modeling something to kind of show the different pieces, parts, in smaller details like the cutouts here for buttons, that's going to make something look more believable instead of trying to do it all with a single piece, just sticking these, the buttons in without kind of the cutouts around them. That can make a big difference here. So We have one rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and move the top points and bottom points so they line up. And once I do that, pretty happy with that. I am going to center this axis. Okay, I'm going to switch to my rotate tool, hold Control or Command, and rotate this 90 degrees. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Maybe, yeah, actually not too bad at all. I'm going to use a spline mask because it's kind of similar to the new boole tool. And in the spline mask, in the object tab, we need to make sure we set the mode correct. Union is what we want, as well as the axis. We want this to happen along the Y. And there's our shape. So what we can do is now make editable, and that will leave us with a spline. And now what we can do is come in and round out these points. So I'm going to select just the outside ones in the most time-consuming method possible. I'm going to chamfer them by just right-clicking and choosing chamfer, trying to line this up pretty good. That works for me. Select these inner points, do a separate chamfer on them since I feel like they have a little bit different chamfer. Line it up. And that looks pretty good to what I'm seeing. So I'm going to call this D-pad outer. And while it would be quicker to make all of these buttons and do everything at once, we'll go through just kind of the D-pad here because it is the most involved. And will also get us to the boole a little bit sooner. So what I can do now that I have the outer shape is I can actually make the inner shape as well by using the Create Outline tool. So I'm in the point mode with our D-pad, outer shape selected. I can do Create Outline. Now with this, it can be helpful to also check on Create New Object. And now you can click and drag outer in to make an outline. And so we can get pretty close here. That actually doesn't look too bad, but I may undo that and try one more time. Just to get something, a little bit larger. Okay, and if I was really trying to do this, I would have paid attention to the exact amount here. So I could consider replicating it, although it looks like there's a larger gap here compared to the other buttons, but I definitely might want to do that for the other buttons. So now we have our separate shape. This is our D-pad inner shape, which we will then extrude. And now we can start doing some boole stuff. Okay, we're going to start by taking our D-pad outer, putting it into an extrude. And once again, its offset is way too much because we didn't think about scale here. So something like 6 centimeters looks pretty good. I can also go into the cap section here and round this out to maybe something like that. So that's going to be the cutout. Let's bring back the base. And it turns out they are already intersecting, but we probably want the base to be a little bit higher here. And now what we can do is create our boole object. So there it is. You want to put your base or kind of main object in there first, and then whatever you plan to cut out or add to it. So I can add my extrude, which let's not forget, this is the D-pad outer. Okay. And right now the mode is set to union, so it's combining these objects. It's turning them into a single object, right? So that way we don't see the intersecting going through. It turns it into a continuous shape. Very useful. In our case, though, we want to subtract. We want to subtract the D-pad shape and where it intersects from our base. Okay, I want to point out, I can just create a simple piece of geometry here to help us with this. You can use multiple operations inside a single boole. So I have my base, I have my D-pad outer here that's subtracting. If I wanted to do something different, what I could do is add my cube, and it too is set to subtract. But what I could do to fix that is add a boolean tag, which is under modeling tags, change the mode to say union, and there we have it. You can see we have different selections we could save out here. That could be very helpful. In fact, that intersecting edges could be very useful for beveling things later on. That's not something I had seen before, but I do wonder if that would work. Unfortunately, because we are doing it, we have it in the boole as well. So let's give that a try here a little bit later. But yes, that's the main ways of working with the boole. We have the cutout for the D-pad. Now we can create the D-pad button. itself by placing it into an extrude. Once again, in the object tab, the offset is way too much. Okay, that's looking okay. I mean, honestly, as long as it's going through the bottom there and we don't see it, it isn't the end of the world. But yeah, maybe something like that looks pretty good. We would want to round this out as well. I should be looking at my image to see roughly how round it should be. So why don't we do that? You can come here, actually make sure this is set to X-ray and that this is set to X-ray so we can see through it. Or we could have just hidden the base all along. And that looks, I mean, I can't see it that well. So we'll say that looks good. That looks good. Bring back the base. We have our D-pad here. Now the D-pad also needs some things booled out. It needs, you know, the arrows as well as the little sphere. So that too is going to go into a boole. Okay, boole. Just call this D-pad again. Can never name things too much. I mean, I suppose you could, but this is not one of those times. Let's just create the sphere really quickly first. So I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to actually make this sphere a child of our spline here, but I want to center the axis to the spline. Actually, it looks like it already is. I did do that previously, but let's just double check. Perfect. That way, when I center the coordinates out of our sphere, it actually gets centered to the middle of our extrude, or that spline, I should say. And now in this boole, we can switch its mode to subtract as well. And while that's a very interesting D-pad, I'm not sure how well it would work. And it certainly doesn't match our reference, so we can just kind of scale this down. Once again, I could use my top view. Actually, I don't know why I did that. Let's hide the base again and put this in X-ray. And as you do this, you get more and more things in X-ray. It gets harder to see things. In fact, why don't we just hide everything but the sphere so we can see how large the sphere should actually be. That's actually pretty good. It's a little bit off, but it's symmetrical with my shapes, so we'll keep it. So that looks good. Maybe move it up just a touch. We could also potentially think about making this editable and just kind of flattening it a little bit. So that way, yeah, we get a little bit of a shallower depression, something like that. Now, for the arrows, I'm going to start with a rectangle spline. Kind of move this and position it here. And, you know, I may actually take this and center it, put it inside the D-pad spline shape so I can zero out its coordinates just to center it for our purposes. I'm not seeing it, so let's take it out. Should be seeing it here, although it would help if that wasn't hidden. So let's hide the D-pad extrude. There we go. Now everything should be centered. And we have that. We have this. And we can just come in here and do a little bit of line cutting to add those points. Can scale this down until they reach a point. Looks good. This goes up. We want one more line cut. So that can move them up here. And then this will scale out. And then these, we could scale down like I just did to kind of make the arrow. But you can also use your coordinate manager and find that, yep, it's the z-axis we're flattening out. Find that value on the z-axis and just set it to 0. So now we have our arrow. And once again, trying to keep things centered and all aligned. What I'm going to do is take my arrow and I want to move its axis to the middle of the sphere here. So I'll make it a child of, say, the sphere. I guess we have to show it now. And I'm going to turn on axis modification. But if you were to go into the coordinates tab now, right, I can move my axis and try and center it. That's a little bit tricky. Centering this out, though, won't actually do it. It'll move the object. That's, once again, where we need to come into the coordinate tab, coordinate manager, and we can zero out the position of our axis. Along the Z, the Y, I'm not terribly concerned with. That doesn't really affect what we're doing. Make sure to turn this off. And now I should be able to just hold Control, then Shift while I rotate this, and rotate this out. And while it doesn't quite line up with the picture, it should be symmetrical to the shapes I've created, and that's what's most important. So we have all of these rectangles, which are actually arrows. I'm going to select the first one, hold Alt or Option, and put it in an extrude and call it arrows before placing the rest of the shapes in there. Now, we'll still only extrude the first one because what we need to do is go into the Object tab and check on Hierarchical. It's a fun word to say. And so now we have our arrows extruded. Once again, lower the offset. Maybe in the cap section, round this out a bit. And now we can start working with this in the rest of our boole. So let's bring all that stuff back. So unhid the D-pad. I can see that's looking pretty good. Maybe should be a little bit, pulled a little bit further up. And it actually looks like it's already working in our boole, and it is. And so now we have our D-pad. And if we bring back our whole thing, maybe turn off X-ray mode here on the booles, we now have a very nice looking D-pad with an appropriately sized cutout. And for the rest of the buttons, it's pretty much rinse and repeat. So I'm going to do those as well. I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker just because, like I said, it is a lot of the same. Let's see what we can do here. We're going to start with circle, scale it down. So we have that. And you know what? Let's just hide the main shape because that's going to just get in my way. So that looks pretty good. Once again, looking at the outside more than anything. But honestly, as long as we're close enough, that should be fine. With these circles, I'm once again concerned about making sure things are aligned and all that good stuff. So what I'll do is just hold Control and drag along the Z-axis so I know it goes straight down. I can select both of them. Places my axis at the middle here. Switch to my Rotate tool, hold Control, rotate them as well. Now all of those buttons are good. And in fact, I'm going to connect all of these buttons together because why not? They're going to have the same shapes, the same extrude, pretty much the same everything. So that just makes my life a little bit easier. We also have that, so we'll call this menu. All right, my caps lock is on, that's fun. Menu, call this buttons, outer. You can also hit your arrow keys up and down to go up and down your object manager, which can make it easier and faster to rename things. For the select and start buttons, I'm going to use a rectangle as my base shape. So place that towards the middle. Maybe scale it down a little bit more. Eventually rotate it. And something like that looks pretty good. I can adjust the height here. And while I could do this, the width, could do this by making it editable. We have the ability to round this out. And so I think that's a little bit easier. Once again, kind of keeps things a little bit more procedural. So that looks pretty good. So I can change the position, the size, even the rounding still with this. Now I want to move this straight across here, and I can switch my coordinate system to world to reset it back to my world axis and not the rotated axis of the object. This allows me to just hold Control, drag this out, and there we go. And now that I have these, I could absolutely just connect the objects and delete and make them editable. So would have been nice to preserve all of that, functionality there, the rounding and whatnot. But for time purposes, we'll just do this. I take it back. I should have kept one of those rectangles so that I could have used it for the vents here. That's fine. Here we are. We'll make it work. So we're going to rotate this, try and get it looking good. I think we want height. Yep. Height. Maybe a little bit of width. Too much width. Maybe we need to type in some width. And then once again, use the rounding. And the rounding just kind of stops. You can turn it up as high until the points kind of intersect or meet each other. So that looks pretty good. And I'm going to use a cloner to help space these evenly. I could certainly get the angle correct just by duplicating these, but I'm going to use a cloner really quickly to help me with that. So I'm going to select my rectangle, hold down Alt or Option, and click on the cloner to place the rectangle inside as a child. We're going to switch the mode here to object. I'm sorry, not object, linear. Don't know what I was thinking. Take the Y position, zero that out, and then it looks like we want X-axis. So I'm going to just duplicate that out, and we want a total of 6. 6, right? Yep. And I can use the endpoint here to just help me with the spacing. And I always like to use this for something like this, double check the values, because I can see, you know what, I probably don't want anything on the X. And so that keeps things a little bit better. Maybe we move them down just a touch so they line up. Cool. I am going to make these editable, or actually just connect objects and delete. So we have a single object for this. I have found that the fewer objects in the the boole, the better. So combining the vents, combining the buttons does seem to make things a little bit more speedy when it comes to turning booles on and off and whatnot. So we have all that stuff. We can now we have all of the outer parts, I should say. We can start with the inners. Vents actually don't need it. So menu, I'm in here, point mode. Come on. Why am what's happening? Oh, I see why. It's not a editable object, so make it editable. Would have had to do that anyway. At some point, we're going to do create outline, create new object is on. So we want something like that. So this is inner. And then come here to our buttons, do the same thing. Point mode, create outline, kind of zoom in here so you have a little bit more room to click and drag. That looks pretty good to me. So come down here, call this inner. And that leaves us with start and select. Select and start, I should say. Create outline, same thing. That looks pretty good. And once again, should the spacing be consistent? Perhaps. Should I be paying more attention to the spacing? Absolutely. But just as a quick kind of model of something like this, I think it's just fine. So now what we can do is take all of the outer shapes, and those are going to go into their own extrude. The inner shapes can go there as well. So I think I have everything I need. We have the outers, we have the vents, and we could actually just use the same extrude as the D-pad. But we'll use a different one just to be on the safe side. So there's another extrude. Oops. There's an extrude. Let's put all of our outer shapes, including the vents, into it. So we have something like that. And you'll notice not everything is extruding, and that's because good old hierarchical is not turned on. Lower the offset to something a little bit more manageable. Let's bring back the base so we have something to work with here. Maybe something like that. So that looks good. We'll call this, I don't know, cutouts, outer, something like that. So it takes a second. It's a little bit easier to see without X-ray. So I'll turn that off. We have our cutouts now. Something else that can potentially help just make this a little bit easier to see, especially when you're working on all gray stuff like this, is to turn on screen space ambient occlusion. It just gives things a little bit more depth and dimension. And depending on how much geometry you have and your computer, this may slow things down to the bit it's not useful. But I think right now it is helping things look a little bit more detailed, a little bit easier to see. Let's see. So we just added our outer. We need to round out the insides here. So in the caps, you can just start rounding this out. Maybe something like that. We may not see a whole lot of that. Really, the edges I want to round out are these right here. And there are a few different ways we can do that. So the first way would be to group this and then place a bevel deformer inside of it. And because of the angle of these edges, that's what it's going to bevel for us. Maybe we only want like 0.7 for the amount. A couple of subdivisions here. And we have nice rounded edges. Okay. Now, the other way I am very curious about, and actually think it would use a bevel as well, is we do have those intersect edges, right? So we can take this selection and actually use it in a bevel as well and see if it works on those edges, because now it's just on the edges that are intersecting that we made from our other shape. So that's super handy. Now it looks like it got rid of this edge, but I'm not concerned about that because honestly, that edge, it should have come from our base here. So we can round this out. Yeah. So I forgot to do that earlier. Oof, that's a bit too much. But I think that might be as well. This might be another situation where we kind of look at this and use our reference here to figure it out. So, and I can see now as I'm clicking these things, it is starting to slow down a little bit. That looks just about right. Okay. Close enough for me for right now. So that looks good. And yeah, we got some nice rounded edges, nice little details, a little bit of weirdness going in here with some of the extrudes and whatnot. Super easy to fix, but also I don't think it matters. Really it would be this and turning down the caps should fix a lot of those issues. It's also weird that it's kind of bottoming out there. So yeah, I think they're just a little bit too deep. Let's pull them a little bit further up, maybe something like that. And I think we'll end up with something a little bit better. Still a bit weird to me though. Although I guess we are seeing the hard surfaces on the top here. It's also a Phong issue that's causing this, so I'm not terribly concerned at the moment. And like I said, it's going to be covered up anyway. Is the bevel? No. Not responsible for any of that. So next up will be the buttons. The good news is we already have all of them created. We'll use another extrude. Drop all of them in there. Once again, could have maybe used the same extrude as our D-pad to have similar extrusion amounts and whatnot. For the object tab, once again, hierarchical. Turn down the offset, and it's a bit strange. I'm not seeing all of my buttons here. I'm missing the select and start. And I suspect they're, going the opposite way. An easy way to fix that is just go into point mode with their object selected. And actually, I'll do it up here so it's not off screen, but go point order, reverse sequence. There we go. All good with that. Can move these down now, but I'll move the extrude. And try and figure out how high I want the buttons to be raised. Make it similar to the D-pad. I'm not seeing in here for whatever reason. Maybe something like that. And yeah, I would want to make these a little bit more realistically sized so they can fit in here just fine. Maybe something like that. D-pad probably should be raised up as well. I would absolutely go back and center all the axes on this stuff because it's kind of a pain to move things when the axis is not anywhere close to where you're going. So for the buttons, let's round them out. See if one looks good. Yeah, not too bad. I feel like the buttons and whatnot could be a little bit larger based on what I'm seeing, right? Those gaps look a little bit too much, but fine for right now. And really all we have left now is our screen. So taking a look at the screen, all right, there's a little cutout here. It's weird. There's almost like a little groove going around here. And I'm not going to worry too much about that. But yeah, it's a little bit of a cutout. And then the screen with the bezel and whatnot. So let's start with another rectangle. Because I wasn't in my top view, I will need to change the plane here to the X and Z. Center this. And honestly, I should put this in the base rectangle so I can center out its coordinates there to center the rectangle to it. Back to a top view to help with all of this. So we have our rectangle. And let's make sure we name this buttons. rectangle, good. This is going to be our cutout, so I'm going to make this editable just to allow me a little bit faster editing here. And that's odd. I guess it isn't too odd that it wasn't quite centered. Still not perfect or ideal that it was a little bit off. So what I'll end up doing then is instead of basing this on the reference image, basing it on our boole in our other shapes. So boole, I do want the base here. So we have our rectangle. I may even just go into lines mode to help me with this. Perfect. I mean, I wouldn't say perfect, but definitely easier to see what I'm working with here. So just inside the rounding, take the top here, move this down, trying to be consistent with the spacing all the way around this. I can base it off the image. But yeah, that's kind of what we have for the screen. So it ends up being a little bit shorter. We could extend ours, but it would cut into the bevel part of it. So I don't mind that we're not doing that. We'll add an extrude. So hold down Alt or Option, create an extrude with the rectangle selected. This is our screen cutout. Move this kind of up. Lower the offset. So that may be too little offset for once. Pull this down so it's cutting out a little bit of this for our screen. This goes into our main boole. Let's turn off the X-ray mode for this, which isn't on. So let's turn it on. And now we have no boole at all, no base shape. So what did I do to cause that? I wonder. Let's see. Let's turn off the bevel. Not soloing anything. Turn off this. So where's my rectangle shape? It's there. Fun. So what are we doing here? I'm sure it's something simple that everybody, aha, there it is. Yeah, like I said, something simple. Got a bit too complicated with all the stoplights and whatnot. But yeah, there's our screen cut out. That's looking good. All right, for the actual glass or plastic cover, we can duplicate that screen cutout. We'll call this screen cover. And what I'll want for this is no end cap, no offset. So we're just left with a flat plane. I'm going to put this into X-ray mode so we can kind of see through it like glass would. And even though it's not a material, it will help later on. And then come in here maybe to a right view. So F3, and lower this imprecisely, and line it up with the top of our thing. So now we have, oops, our little cutout there. And that's looking pretty good. The only thing I wish I had done, it's a shame I didn't do it before, would be to round out those edges a little bit. So we can do that at the same time with both of those rectangles selected. And it honestly wouldn't matter if we couldn't select them because we can just replace them. But select all the points, Control or Command A, maybe something like that. I really should be in a top view, just kind of looking and seeing what would match what we have. Something like that looks pretty good. So now we have our screen cut out and our screen. Now the actual screen itself doesn't have any rounding on it, right? So shame on me for not making that rectangle, saving that rectangle before. So we can still fix that. We'll take our screen cover. We'll call this screen, screen cover, no N. Another great example of spelling. There's our screen cover. Let's turn on the end cap again. And let's just solo this because I'm going to want to get rid of the bevels. So let's solo the spline instead. And what I'll do is just switch the interpolation to hard interpolation. And honestly, we could just like delete those, delete those. Now, I think my proportions are going to be a bit off. Let's unsolo that. Yep. And so just using my scale tool, everything else should be perfectly aligned. If that's what it takes, I can do something like that. And that should look pretty good. For the screen, I do want it to have a little bit of thickness to it. I'm going to make the color darker so we can see it just kind of stick out, at least for right now. So display color to custom, choose a darker color. Let's bring back our main shape here. And then, yeah, here's our screen. And so that looks like it fits pretty well. Honestly, it looks a little small. The good news is we can fix that. So not sure how exactly that happened, but this is where we can take a little bit of creative freedom here. Oops. If we want it to be a little bit larger because it matches our proportions a little better, so be it. So yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's make the spacing a little bit more even. So something like that. And there we go. I would want that screen though to be all the way down. Yeah, just barely sticking out. Cool. So there's our screen. Last part of this is kind of the little groove going all the way around here. It's just a nice little detail that lets us know this is made up of multiple pieces. And like I said towards the beginning, that can really help something seem a lot more believable, a lot more realistic. But the rest of these things like the volume switches, power button, it's all a lot of the same of what we've been doing. And this is actually something where it would be easier to do this if this was a polygon object. So for instance, if our base here was a polygon object and we make editable, we could just go in here with our loop path cut tool, cut a few segments. Those are a little bit off, but hopefully you get the idea. Loop the selection, extrude it in a little bit. Don't have create caps or anything turned on. And, there we go. Right? As we've used pretty much splines for everything else, I'm going to do this with splines. It's a little bit counterintuitive, if you will. But I'm going to take my base spline. I'm going to solo it. And what I need is a spline a little bit smaller than this and a little bit larger than this. So point mode, create outline. And the smaller one here is going to be how far in the groove goes. So maybe something like that. I can get rid of the outer original one. And then in this next one, I'm going to do create outlines again. I'm going to uncheck create new object. And this one I just want to be a little bit larger. Just add some thickness to the cutout we're going to be creating here. So this goes in an extrude. This extrude needs to be pretty thin, something like that. Can now move this where we want the cutout. And we can now take this and place it inside of our boole. And there we go. There's the cutout. And if I decide it's too tall, I can come in here to the groove and lower this amount. And so a lot more flexibility. I can make some changes easier than if I'd done this using the polygon method. And so that's why I decided to do this. And actually, it's still relatively responsive, a lot more responsive than some of the other times I've done this. So I don't exactly know why. But yeah, that's it. Pretty much modeled. The last thing I'll do before finishing this section up is if I was getting ready to do the lighting and materials of this, one way to do this would be to group everything together here, right? Not any of the previous instances, but just group objects. And we'll call this, handheld and held. Make another instance of it. And then just take this instance and move it where I'm going to do my lighting and set up my camera. So something like this, rotate it, right? Create a camera, look through the camera, get rid of any weird rotations, center it. If I need help centering this, can always go into the display, make sure we check on grid and add some more segments or cells, I should say, to the grid so that you can use it to more properly center things. Once you're happy with it, protection tag on the camera. And then I would also turn off the grid because it can be pretty annoying. That will do it for this one. If there's anything else you would like to see, please leave me a comment down below. So for instance, if you wanted me to do the lighting and materials, perhaps a simple animation for the handheld, I would absolutely be more than happy to do so. If you could also like and subscribe to my channel, I'd appreciate it. And until next time, take care.